I'm Helen King and I work on the history of midwifery and childbirth. I'm based at the Open University and my original training was in the ancient world, but since then I've got later and later. So I've become very interested in 18th century midwifery because that's the point where there's a change from the woman as the most obvious midwife to the man, not just in difficult births, but in straightforward ones as well. One of the figures I've been looking at is a guy called Brudenell Exton, who wrote a new and general system of midwifery in 1751. Now he's really on the cusp between women as midwives and men as dealing with normal births. Exton's background is really hard to find out about. We know he was based in Surrey, in Kingston upon Thames, and he tells us he trained with two different practitioners, one who was very pro-forceps, that's Chapman, and one who was anti, and that's Manningham. And he trained with both of them over a 10-year period before he wrote this book. By the time he wrote the new and general system of midwifery, he developed his own technique, which was using the coccyx and sort of moving it during the process of childbirth so that the baby's head could emerge. He preferred this to using instruments. What he says in this particular story is that he was called to a woman who was aged 42. She called him in because at 42 she'd never had children before. And he went into this, and when she went into labour, he was called. He found out that there was a mismatch between the pelvis and the baby. Baby's head too big, pelvis too small. Now, he doesn't seem to have known that before he arrived while she was in labour, so he hadn't really assessed this beforehand. Yet he thought, generally, that risk in childbirth was due to a mismatch between pelvis and fetal head, or sometimes between the fetal head and the actual position of the womb, whether it was tilted or not. So when he's called to this woman, he discovers the mismatch, and he then tells her not to push under any circumstances until he reckons labour has started properly, and that means the breaking of the waters. At that point, he checks when the head's engaged in the birth canal, and then he tells her to push, and he does this manual manoeuvre to move the coccyx. And it's successful. She gives birth to a healthy child after a mere 12 hours. Now this is a good story, and it's interesting to me that the way it works is not that he's already identified her in some way as at risk, but she's identified herself on the grounds of being 42 and never having given birth before. Now historically, the age at which your own age becomes a problem does vary, so sometimes in your 40s is okay. Now a lot more women give birth at a later age, but clearly in 1751, or in the 1740s when he must have seen her, her age is considered a dodgy factor, but by her, not by midwives or man midwives imposing on her. Yet that's not actually the problem. The problem is the mismatch between fetal head and size of the pelvis. So he's called in because of her age, but in fact it isn't the age that's the problem, it's the anatomy. So it's an interesting case to me because it shows a man midwife coming in and finding out that there's an issue, but not necessarily the one that the woman thought was the issue. So men and women are having different ideas here about what makes a childbirth difficult, and in fact hers turns out to be fine because he's there to help.